Being from India and visiting really frequently, I've really come to appreciate so much about my home country. And although I do take a lot of pride in where I'm from, I am kind of cognizant of some of its developmental issues. So, what kind of inspired me to write about mental health and then hone in on men was kind of twofold. One was what I talked about in my essay. So, basically, when I was in India, I was at a clinic in Kerala, which is where I'm from. And while I was sitting in the waiting room with my family, I saw this really distraught looking man get up from his seat and very quietly approach the counter, constantly looking around as if he were trying to avoid people he knew. And that's what originally caught my eye. And I watched him kind of whisper in what seemed like a really anxious tone, kind of asking whether the hospital that we were at had the resources to help him for his psychological issues. I watched him become really stressed once the woman at the counter looked at him almost disapprovingly and told him that those kind of resources were nowhere near here. And I also saw him murmuring to himself after in Malayalam that it had taken him months to build the courage to come to this hospital and even ask for help. And that small exchange has really sat with me and kind of sparked my initial inspiration because, this is just a random man in a hospital that I saw. This is just everyday life. And the other piece of inspiration that I didn't discuss in my essay because I didn't want to use the experiences of someone I've known for a long time, but essentially, after we visited the hospital that day, I was pretty curious. So I spoke with my family about what we saw while we were there, and they talked to me about one of our neighbors in India, just slightly older than I am. He had also always struggled with mental health as a child, just has been that way. But because of the kind of concept of seeking treatment and how it is so strongly stigmatized, especially for men, his family kind of shrugged it off and decided that his issues would just resolve on their own. So there was always that concept that because he's male, he should never cry or show weakness, even as young as being 5 years old. Like you're 5 years old, you fall on the ground, you get a scrape, but you're told, don't cry, you're a man. This isn't what you should be doing. And I think that really resonates with such a young person. And I think that has kind of exacerbated his situation because, as we know, that's not how it works. As he got older, his struggle with mental health only exacerbated again because of the stigma around it. And it worsened to the point that he attempted suicide. And it's heartbreaking to think that this is genuinely someone who lived a few houses down from my house in India. So while I was writing this essay, I came across the fact that although 150 million Indians need professional health treatment, mental health treatment, just 1/5 of them actually seek it. And just by taking these two kind of anecdotes, I really quickly found inspiration for an essay that I think speaks to not just men's mental health, but Indian mental health as a whole. What I learned from writing this essay in general, I think that doing the research and kind of delving deeper into the concepts really illuminated a lot of aspects about Indian mental health that I would have never realized without IPA's competition. For example, even just doing the research itself highlighted the lack of acknowledgement, even on the internet, for the issue. None of the information that I included in my essay and that I was looking for came up very easily. It took a decent amount of digging to actually find this information. And I had also never kind of realized the influence of media and entertainment on the perception of mental health. It makes sense in retrospect. Like, I can think of a myriad of Malayali or Bollywood films that I've seen myself that villainize mentally ill characters and include these kind of paranormal elements that further just disparage treatment. And of course, nobody that consumes this media immediately thinks that people with mental health issues are subhuman, but it absolutely kind of infiltrates the subconscious, I think. And that's why we see those looks of disapproval or the hesitancies to seek treatment in India today. Because I also read while I was researching that about 75% of Indians report having a negative opinion of the mentally ill. And another thing that I became much more cognizant of was the influence of gender roles on men's mental health in India. So IPA's essay prompt asked about some of the lesser known challenges that came with the developmental issue of my choice. And originally, my idea was to discuss some of the less widely recognized causes for the stigma surrounding mental health, such as academic competition in India, because it is pretty severe. But once I had entered the depth of my research, I came across articles that were discussing how the suicide rate for men is 200% more than it is for women in India. And a lot of things clicked at that point. I realized that both pieces of inspiration for my essay in the very beginning were, in fact, about men's mental health, and that I hadn't even connected the dots until I was working with IPA's prompt. This is absolutely something that I can see myself engaging with, not just now, but also in the future. I think that one of the biggest things, the concept of corporate social responsibility, CSR, that's that kind of incentive for huge companies like Coca-Cola, Amazon, Google, Apple to partake in philanthropy to boost their public image. And every single one of us is a consumer, meaning we all hold the power to kind of direct that CSR. So if we're able to use our power, my power right now, to redirect where this CSR is being taken, we can actively make that change. That's just one thing. Another concept is that of the Mines Act, which is a United States act right now that marks the inclusion of psychiatric resources in foreign aid. And right now, given the severity of the state of various nations globally, the Mines Act applies to those in current war zones. But I really believe that with advocacy and some development, for example, I have a friend right now he's a freshman in college and he is advocating for mental health days in the state of Pennsylvania. And it is a active piece of legislature that is being passed through Congress and Senate. So just knowing that someone so young has the ability to make that kind of change and push that forward, I fully believe that I could do exactly the same. So I think that just being able to advocate for that, the Mines Act can apply to any nation that would benefit from these resources. And it's not to say that India completely lacks these resources. It's kind of more that if society sees that the most powerful country in the world, the United States, prioritizes mental health in India, the stigma can really be minimized in that way. And the last thing is, I know everyone talks about creating awareness online and internationally, but it truly is an effective means to an end. Organizations like in my essay, I talked about the Minds Foundation, Sangat, and the Banyan, which are all organizations that look at mental health in India for men specifically. And just by supporting them, we can obviously create our own kind of grassroots foundations. We can raise money, we can support them even through the internet. Our internet presence is vital. And just by doing any of these things, we are actively reducing the stigma that plagues the nation.